The irony of what Steve just said is we're going to be talking about a lot of center pivot topics, and I no longer manage a single center pivot. That's the irony of how these things work. I currently live in Arizona. I manage properties in Arizona and California. I've been a consultant to the groundwater district for a number of years. I think Steve mentioned that before. Prior to that, I was an extension irrigation engineer out of Amarillo for an extended period. I've tested hundreds of wells in this area, flow tested thousands in the area, been on lots of pivots. I'm kind of familiar with this area. It's my sweet spot. It's where I like to be. Maybe the unfortunate thing is that my family's in Arizona, and so we came here, and Marcel just mentioned, oh, you had none of those kids when you were here.
No, you had some.
We moved here with 0, left with 3,
that's right.
and now we have 4. It's just funny how things change, but after 3 we realized, oh, we got to get a little closer to home. So this is really for me, it's a pleasure to come back and chat on these topics with people that I really enjoy. So we're going to be covering this in 3 different slugs. The first is the idea of what are we trying to accomplish with irrigation. The second, we're going to get into the irrigation systems, namely pivots, and then we're going to get into pumping plants and things that you can do to impact exactly what was just shared about the energy balances and what you're trying to do to make sure that the water that you do pump and apply gives you the best bang for the buck. There's a couple things that you'll probably recognize with everything that I go through. We're going to try to relate everything back to some very simple common denominators. The first one being money. The dollar is the common denominator that goes across the board on all of these things. And it's helpful for us to understand, even though we get caught in the throes of specifically farming, it's a business. It has to make economic sense for us. So we can be as esoteric and academic as we want on all of these theoretically. My approach is that we're going to have to move past that as quickly as possible and get to bottom lines on these things. So I hope you understand that what we share isn't, I kind of laugh. It might be exhausting to you guys to hear this, but it's by no way an exhaustive measure of what we could get into. You can really get into the weeds in all these topics. We're going to try to paint the picture, though, where it's all on principles and things that you can apply directly to your operation. So if you see some numbers on here that are either pressure numbers or dollar numbers or flow numbers, and you say, that doesn't match me, I'm going to ask you to not discount what's being said, but say, okay, maybe I don't have 500 gallons per minute. Try to put it in the lens of, well, I do have 400 gallons per minute, and this is now relevant to me, okay? Just the same, it's really easy for us to get up here and be really preachy. I don't want to be preachy. There's a lot of content to cover. I really would like to engage if we can, so if there's questions along the way, go ahead and stop me, and if we don't get through all the materials in your packet, it's pretty well documented where you can study it later and get into the weeds on that. Fair preamble? We good to go? Okay, thanks guys. So here's our botany quiz. You got the cheat sheet in your book, so let's don't look at the book now. Or you can look ahead, however you want. What element makes up the largest dry matter percentage of a plant? This is a little bit of the why do we do what we do. What element?
Carbon.
All right. Good. And then, taking it one step further, this is the building block of the world. What is the process by which plants accumulate carbon?
Photosynthesis.
Oh, man. Thank you. I know this seems rudimentary, okay? This is basic. We forget this as farmers all of the time. Where does carbon enter the plant and in what form? Through the roots? We got it through the roots. Anybody think it's different than that? Through the leaves. Well, those are biometrically different. So we got an argument it's through the roots, through the leaves. Which is it? Almost exclusively through the leaves, through carbon dioxide, and that's the form it's in. Okay, so just pause for a second here. This is the natural exchange between us as, in our case, mammals, where we're having to respirate, where we're breathing in and out. We need that oxygen in. We exhale in what form? Carbon dioxide. The plants, they contribute meaningfully because they're kind of the opposite of that. They take that carbon dioxide in They capture that carbon, and then they give back that oxygen that we need. That's the symbiosis of the life. And in the process here, they're capturing hydrogen in ways, oxygen in ways, and they're building these simple sugars that build the building blocks of all the energy that we get to enjoy. So what does this have to do with irrigation systems? Literally everything. Like, we are trying to, with irrigation, mitigate the risk that we have of having a failed plant by really supplementing this natural system in a meaningful way. About 70% of the world's food and fiber is grown on arid or semi-arid lands for a couple of major reasons. One is that the weather and the climate usually is very favorable for being able to grow those things, harvest those things, create those systems. But the arid and semi-arid regions have one major shortfall. They don't have enough water to allow this process of photosynthesis to work in its peak form. So what we can do with irrigation is supplement that thing and then gain all of the benefits of a really robust system. And that's exactly what we do in irrigated agriculture. So here's all of that story in one picture for those who like to learn like me. A children's book, teach to me like a 5-year-old, that's where we're at here. Okay, the idea, you've got a plant here, it's got leaves, carbon dioxide coming in, capturing this light energy by an open leaf and exchanging oxygen out. Now the water does enter through the roots, which is critical, and the water is the source of this oxygen that leaves. That's where the conversions happen. Okay? So we might look at water differently. Instead of in a botany approach, we can look at it now as a physics type approach, which is a bit of a balanced approach. You say, why is this water important to a plant? And there's 3 major things in addition to that photosynthesis. One is that it provides the plant structure. I like to think of it a little bit like if a leaf is a water balloon. If it's got plenty of turgor pressure, plenty of pressure from the water, the leaves can be open so they can capture the sunlight, which is critical. If it doesn't have that, what happens? The leaves shrivel up. Okay, and you've all seen that, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally. The water also participates in temperature regulation. You can think of that plant as a radiator. Okay, an optimal plant is going to use water it brings in from the leaves, and then it's going to control its ideal temperature by allowing certain water to leave with certain heat and energy with it. But if it needs to, it can actually hunker down and keep that water to maintain its temperature. And then ultimately, we saw that water moves through the roots. Most all of the nutrients, save for that carbon, do actually move through the roots, and so it needs the media of the water to put it into solution and then move it in. That's why things like fertigation are so effective. You put this major nutrient in with the water, and then it gets a free ride through the plant's vascular system, through the water which is moving. So some interesting things here. Who knows what we are looking at on the screen, or who's familiar with what we're looking at on screen? All right, William, and thanks for having your name badge up too. That one I have to say guy or dude or something.
It's a plant cell.
This is a plant cell. What's inside this plant cell that we're trying to highlight?
The cell membrane?
So I'm going to move inside even more than that. We're trying to look at this piece here, which is called the stomata. Okay, and it's the valve within this cell. Okay, who's familiar with what a stomata does? Okay, the stomata is like a duckbill valve that kind of opens and closes to facilitate that exchange transfer between the atmosphere, which has all of this carbon dioxide in it, that the plant wants the carbon, and then the water that we put in the plant through the roots. Who knows? This is the real quiz, okay? This is a higher level quiz. Why do we grow corn based on this picture? Based on what we're seeing in this picture, the content of the stomata and the cell and the membranes, why do we grow corn?
Some people think there's money in it.
Yeah, well, once upon a time, we had the illusion that corn was really valuable, and it got to $8 a bushel, and we're like, we're corn growers. And now it's $4 a bushel, and we can't rid ourselves of that addiction. So, corn is a unique crop for production because it's a C4 crop. Okay, and C4 is a distinction of what type of photosynthesis that it practices. Most of the crops, like cotton, would be a C3 plant. Okay, so sorghum and corn are C4. And what that means is when that carbon comes in, there's an additional membrane, additional piece that captures carbon as 4 molecules. What that allows for is it allows for, Harold probably thinks I'm going to a joke here. This is the reality. This is not a joke.
I'm waiting.
Okay, yeah, I know. We grow corn because it is the most efficient carbon capturer out of all of the crops that we can grow, which means you get bang for the buck on that exchange. The carbon dioxide comes in, and when those stomates open again, you barely lose any carbon out. Where with the C3 plants, what happens is the carbon comes in as carbon dioxide, it breaks up into individual carbon pieces, and when that stomate opens again to have that exchange, you bleed off a little bit of carbon. You bleed off a little bit of carbon. And the way that you can think about this is we say, oh, cotton is really, really efficient, water use efficient, because it doesn't take us much to grow. But if you went out there and harvested your cotton, you're lucky to take 1,500 pounds worth of product out, where if you go out and you harvest corn for grain, you're taking thousands of pounds, and if you take corn for silage, you're taking 25 to 30 tons. Okay, so if you want to see the difference between a C3 and a C4, that exchange of water for carbon is just so good in corn. Sorghum's the same. Okay, sorghum's also a C4 plant. But it all has to do with these things. And so I know this seems a little esoteric. You're like, I really didn't come here for this. I want to learn about turning my switch on and changing my gearboxes. I would like for you guys to think that those really are a subset of what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is optimize what that plant needs. So your irrigation timing matters, where you put the water into the plant matters, the percentage of water that goes to the plant versus what's evaporated really matters, the things that you can put in the water to benefit the system, all of those is where as a good irrigator, your mind needs to be at. The machines are just the mechanics that allow you to do that. And again, I'm guilty. I like machines. But that's not what we're optimizing when we're irrigating, especially if we're tight on water. Okay, so this leads us to the things that we are familiar with talking about. So evapotranspiration, or ET. Evapotranspiration is the combination of the water that comes up through the plant and goes out the leaves, as well as the water that would be on the soil surface that naturally evaporates. Evapotranspiration is a model that uses things like weather conditions and plant size to give us an estimate of what that plant should use in a healthy condition. Okay, I want to make that out as something really important. ET is a model. It's not a measure. The reason this is useful is as a model, it can give you some projection into the future, knowing what you know about today, so that you can make some longer term management decisions. It also gives you some response after the fact when you have actual numbers to plug into the model of what your plant had used. But I want to couch this in an important way. ET being a model, all models are wrong and some are useful. This is one of those useful models. But the plant response is never the same based on the health and condition of the plant, because the plant is this biological system that's dealing with all these stresses, and it has indicators that respond back to that. So if we're going to talk about ET, what I do want you to understand though is what we can control with ET. The idea being that if we get water coming in, let's call that precipitation, we have transpiration that's through the leaves and evaporation, which is through the soil surface or the exposed surface. Which one of these two structures, or which one of these two processes, is the one that we want to optimize for? Do we want to optimize for transpiration, or do we want to optimize for evaporation? You want to optimize for evaporation? Okay, any other thoughts on that?
You want transpiration.
Transpiration.
Yeah.
Yep. So that would be, in my mind, broken down to this litmus here. Transpiration allows the water to accomplish all of those things through the plant that we just talked about. You want the water to move all the way through the plant so it can accomplish those things that we were just covering. Evaporation can be summarized essentially as wasted water. It is very, very little for your yield. Does that make sense? We talked about it. This is important because this informs what we're trying to do with those irrigation systems. We talked previously in that last presentation about surface, where you've got a lot of exposed water. All of that exposed water that's moving, that's just evaporation, okay? That can't contribute to yield. You go all the way to subsurface drip, where you apply the water in the root zone, where maybe if you do it perfectly well, there's none that's evaporated. Those are the opposite sides of that spectrum, where you can force all of that water to come up through the roots, move the nutrients, regulate the temperature of the plant, allow those stomates to affect exactly on their schedule, and you get the biggest return on your water investment. So let's go through some ET quizzes. And again, please no cheating. The answers are in your book. I want to see who knows what. Wind. My slides are backwards. Man, this is supposed to be a question. We'll get it all on the screen. Okay? So the question here is, what contributes most to ET? Okay, intuitively, most people, this is a trap I was trying, this is my party trick here. Most people think it's heat, it's temperature. In some places, yes. In the Texas North Plains, no. Wind is the primary driver for the ET model. Okay? Followed by heat. And then in these models, usually around the second week of July, these start to change a little bit because we get a little bit of a natural lull where the wind isn't quite as fierce in July and August, but the temperature is rising or high, and it's for long periods of the day, so the heat contributes more than the wind. The important thing to matter is that these two factors are what drive ET the most. The third one, and this starts to make sense, this is where with an ET model where you've got a reference evapotranspiration multiplied by a crop coefficient. The crop coefficient changes throughout the year, mainly based on this vegetation mass. And if you think about it, if that's a machine or if it's a radiator, the bigger machine you have out there, the more water it's going to require to keep up with those needs. You started with small cells, and now you've got millions of cells in this plant. You started with a little carbon that you're trying to store. At some point in the year, you're going to convert from that vegetative to a reproductive so we can get grain, etc. All of these combined contribute to what that ET model says. And so we would like to optimize for all of these in the best way that we can. So if we look at what would be a classic, I would call this a Mesa to Lisa type system. Okay, a lower elevation spray. It's not all the way up at the top like the guys in Kansas like. Who's from Kansas? Good, I'm not going to get run out of here for that. Okay, so high drops. These are still pretty low. What was our number one factor for impacting ET?
Wind.
Okay. How much are we protecting this water from wind with this system?
Not much.
Not much. Okay. Maybe some because it's lower to the ground. The ground's going to capture some. But if we compare that to this, do we see much wind loss here?
Not as much.
There's some, but not as much. Yep. Okay. And I would say that this isn't even the best picture of this because we could do some certain other things to impact this to move away from that transpiration model. If we had denser ground cover, that would help tremendously. This picture just shows the water portion of it really. This has a story actually. These pictures and a whole other suite that I have are in, these were near Stratford. Producer called me out he said, I think I've got a bone to pick with you. Like, let's argue on the merits of these sprays versus the bubblers. And we went out and we looked at it. And at the end, we decided this was going to be much better in his windy conditions. The wind was only like 15 miles per hour that day, but with some of the pictures you could take, they don't show up on the screen. You see this whole mist of water leaving the field. You all have seen that. Even when you think you're protecting it with wind fighters or good new pads. Anyway. Just another example. We've all seen these type of pictures. Okay, so let's look at something here. This relation. Wind speed per month in Amarillo. This is what I was talking about. You get this major drop in July and August. This is where the trees finally stop leaning this way, and they lean like this, you know? Or I should say, the tree.
Yeah.
Here's the temperature by month. Okay, see it comes up. And we've got June, which, just a reminder to everybody, I tend to forget this on occasion because we want to say July and August are the hottest months of the year. Our peak will typically be the 3rd, 4th week of June in terms of temperature. Does that correspond? Does that make sense to anybody in particular? Summer solstice, it should be the hottest because it's the longest daylight, and it is. If you can look back to ugly years like 2011, where you have 116 degrees the 3rd week of June with how many miles per hour wind, and you can start to see what we're really trying to battle here. Okay, so this chart gives that example. Our hardest time of the year typically is going to be this June period where the winds are very high, the temperature is at its peak. We usually get this change that happens where the wind speeds go down, but the temperature is staying hot. This is typically still more manageable. And then the beautiful thing that makes the Texas Panhandle so good for growing crops like corn. You get this cool down that goes into August and all the way through September, and is actually typically pretty reasonable during October, which is very critical because this is when you get a grain fill. Okay? So I want you to have these in mind because we're going to roll into some other important management things that are really critical about understanding this this phenomenon here. Get a little bit more about ET. This would be the idea that there's a reference, which is a grass or bare ground reference. You can multiply it by a crop coefficient, and that gives you these models to match what the actual crop needs were. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. Okay, next quiz. I've already answered this, so we'll put it on the board. How does water enter a plant? This is the one that's through the roots. Okay. How deep are plant roots? Let's say corn. How deep are corn roots? Mature corn. Wherever the water's at. Have you guys dug a plant before? Have you guys went out in the field just out of curiosity with a backhoe?
6 foot.
I've seen corn roots past 6 foot. Stan and I have been on the backhoe looking at that.
Yep.
It'll blow your mind too. You'll think, how'd it get here? Oftentimes the thought is there's roots below the ground, almost a mirror of what's above ground. And so if you got this tall plant, it needs to anchor. It's not going to have its majority of roots, but it will have roots. So the answer is it varies, but deeper than you think. Think of a cotton crop. It can strip all the water that you could potentially apply to it, at least down to 5 feet. I've seen corn do the same thing. Is there such a thing as too much water?
Yes.
Yes, and yes indeed. I would say, hearing those yeses, collectively we've grown as a group. Because there once was a time when there was no such thing as too much water. You guys have all heard it. You guys have probably even been a propagator of it. Catfish method of irrigating and stuff like that. There's no end to how much water. The fact of the matter is, yes, And what we've seen is that saturation stresses are almost exclusively more detrimental than deficit stresses. You'd be better off to be in a drier soil than a wetter soil. Within a range, of course. You take it down to 0, that's called the permanent wilting point for a reason, because the plant wilts and never comes back because it's permanent. You can do the same thing with saturation. It's that idea of you can't starve a profit, we also can't founder a profit. You can give way too much of these inputs. What I want to pay attention to is that this range of too much water and too little water gives us an economic opportunity to really optimize what we're doing with irrigation. And what are signs that a plant needs water? William, what do you got?
Wilts and shrinks.
It wilts, okay. What about a corn plant? What's a sign that a corn plant might give that it needs some water? Yeah, so we got that pineappling. I think we all know it, that curling. What about color? Does color change? Yeah. Okay. My nervousness about saying that is oftentimes the plant will give you the same indicator that it needs water with it being saturated. Yellowing can be both, and it's the same shade of yellow. You really need to be able to inspect it, know what you're looking at. Leaf curling is almost always, though, a sign that the plant needs water. So wilt, weak color, drooping, etc. Why irrigation?
It doesn't rain.
Feed the world.
Yeah. That's a really, that's the, what is it? That's the macro answer. That's why we're doing it. Yeah. It is though. The world would starve to death if we weren't irrigated. We do it because we're optimizing these things because we have a real value in the product that we're producing. And it's a necessary and needed product. This is my soapbox. We've already discussed most of this. This would be a block of soil. So the idea, this is a water balance. Okay, you've got rainfall and irrigation, bringing water in. You also, in some cases, can have a subsurface flow. I manage a couple of properties in the California Delta. Sub-irrigation is an issue. You've got $1,000 drain systems, thousands of dollars per acre drain systems to get the water out because the water will consistently come up. We've got almonds that are 16 feet below sea level with the San Joaquin River going past it. Talk about something trippy when you look out and you see a freighter that's going in the horizon above your head. We've got almonds stuck in this little bowl beneath it. I would say our drainage to fight this is every bit as important as this. Just fascinating. I guess that's to say different parts of the world are going to have different constraints and different things that you're trying to engage and optimize for. But water can enter the root zone absolutely from sub-irrigation. I would say even a little bit in the Ogallala, we see a little bit of this. You may not think it, but season to season, when you take the pressure off of this root zone after harvest, there is usually some water below, and water will move from wet to dry. It will slowly creep up into the soil profile and contribute a little bit. It's not a lot, but if you think of what we're doing with water balance and how hard we pull down on these root zones during the season, you get to capture some of that water back into the soil. It's actually a meaningful contribution. Things we try to avoid, surface runoff. Okay, so if we have so much holding capacity on the surface of the soil, we don't want to apply so much water that we can't keep that water where we place it. One of the strategies with irrigation is you want the water to be where you want it, when you want it. And if you over apply in one area where it moves over to the next area, that's a bad method of irrigation. The other thing we try to fight with our irrigation systems is this evaporation, because that contributes nothing to the crop. There was an era where folks thought that evaporation was providing enough cooling that it was giving you some beneficial step into the crop. The real actual answer to that is that evaporation will give you some local cooling for a short period of time, but it's not sustained. Whereas that same amount of water, if it was going through the plant, would be able to cool that plant for a long period of time, maybe days rather than minutes. And so you want to do all you can to eliminate these two things, which are essentially the wastes of water. Here's in Lipscomb County, as deep as we can get this backhoe to go. The bottom of that hole is over 8 feet, and we were able to measure corn roots in an actively growing field. This was the field, an actively growing, non-stressed field, corn roots down to 8 feet. So this is maybe not something you're going to find in Dallam or Hartley or Moore or Sherman County, where you've got some caliche, you've got some confining layers that are going to slow down that pace of roots. This is a little bit sandier soil, but the roots moved all the way down to that 8-foot mark within the course of the season. Okay, so I don't get concerned too much about my irrigation is too deep. I have confidence that the plant's going to be able to get that out. I would rather protect the water by getting it deep into the soil rather than a known loss, which is evaporation or wind drift loss. Some things just principle-wise to think about with what we're trying to do with soil. Obviously, we're not growing the soil. Okay, so we're going to get in our mind that we've got soil moisture probes and we're trying to fill the soil, fill the profile. All of those things are part of our management package, and we think of it that way, but you're not really filling the soil to your best benefit. If you had enough water to do exactly what you want, you would almost never fill the soil. Almost never fill the soil with water if you had enough capacity, because you'd want to give that plant a dose of water exactly as it needed it and allow the soil to remain oxygenated for all of the other things that are related to an aerobic system like a soil should be, so that you get the benefits of plant growth. But because we are short on water, we manage in a deficit strategy, the soil becomes our bank account. And it's the only way with a capacity limit that before the plant really needs it, we can bank a little bit of this water by limited capacity, store it up so at a later time that plant can take it. It's a little bit of a compromise, but I still want you guys to think, my strategy here is not to fill my profile. My strategy is to accomplish all those other things with the plant. I want that plant to grow and be healthy. I want that plant to have a root system that can thrive so that it can be the base for the rest of the plant that gives me my harvestable product. So if you were to look at a typical well-drained soil, it would have something like 50% of soil particles. Some fraction of that is going to be organic matter. Obviously, the more organic matter you have, that's still a legitimately good thing. And I will say with our no-till and minimum till systems, despite what may be shared, you absolutely can influence the organic matter in the Texas High Plains and North Plains especially. You can meaningfully move that organic matter percentage. Back to the topic at hand, if this is a well-drained soil, it would maintain about 25% water and about 25% of it would be air. And this would be a happy field capacity type soil. What we typically do when we irrigate is we replace this 25% air pockets for a short period of time with an additional 25% of water. And that's what we're managing in terms of that buffer in the soil. So it's important to know how much that block of soil can hold per, I would say in this case, just a nominal 3-foot root zone. You can certainly manage this to a 5-foot root zone as well. Because of the different sizing of the particles of the soil, going from a coarse sand all the way to a clay or even a fine type clay, there's some sweet spot in there in each one of those where you can store so much water. This would be the plant available water within the soil, meaning the water that you can put in the soil that the plant can later extract meaningfully. And this is what your bank account can hold. Okay, so if you think about it like a bank account, silt loam and fine sandy loam and silty clay loam, who's got these three soils on their operation, on their farm? Okay? This is one of the reasons why the North Plains is such a beautiful place to produce crops. You have soil types that have a tremendous amount of holding capacity, which is a balance. It's enough that says, I can retain this water, it's not going to drain out the bottom, but I'm also going to be generous enough as a soil to give it up at a pressure that the plant actually can exert the energy to extract it. Okay, if you can take a clay, for example, And you can end up with such fine micropores and such aggressive surface holding capacity on the clay that you can have what feels like a wet saturated soil and the plant can't outcompete that energy. The vacuum on the water is so tight. Just the same, you go to a coarse sand and you just can't hold anything. It just runs right through it. So now we're going to start piecing these things together. And we still haven't hardly talked about an irrigation system. Sorry about that. I told you this would be 3 parts. We're still at the end of part 1. So we're going to look at an irrigation requirement. We are going to take what would be this ET number and potentially what would be an irrigation demand. That's a subtraction in this case from rainfall. And there's a couple things that I want to look at. If we are going to meet the ET on this particular crop, we can do that with, say, 3 gallons per minute per acre in this scenario. Okay? If you notice, however, we've got this massive void during the middle of the crop where daily it's going to require more water than what we can provide with our irrigation system. If anything should look familiar, it's this phenomenon. We all kind of know that. We overplant our capacity here. It's a deficit irrigation strategy, but we make it work through good management. And I'm going to go back to my my almonds in the California Delta. Any guesses what I designed and built those irrigation systems for, capacity-wise? Hey, we're talking 3 gallons per minute per acre is kind of generous in some of these settings here anymore. 22 gallons per minute per acre on drip. It's a whole different world. It's a whole different world. We don't ever have to worry about this because the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River run right by it, but we've got a whole other host of things that you would never see here that you have to deal with in those settings. Ideally, you would have capacity that was up here all the time. And for a very high value crop, you might do that. For the commodity crops that we grow, we can manage so that we can keep our capacities down, our pumping down. We can work within a regulatory restriction and ultimately make this aquifer last almost indefinitely if we manage it well. The strategy that's really important though is understanding that you will be in a deficit here, but because the plant size is small early, you have this entire window to top off that soil. So what you store in the soil during this time of the year can then be extracted during this time of year to add to your irrigation system capacity. And maybe if you're lucky, you get a little bit of a rainfall in here too. Okay, so all of those things are what are contributing to that total water use. I would argue, and it would be an easy argument to make, that it's much, much harder and you must be a much better irrigator to irrigate in this part of the world than most other parts of the world. And somehow you guys win almost every year on it. You know, a lot of what I'm sharing back is not stuff that I have developed, it's stuff that I've learned from working with farmers and producers like yourself who intuitively have stepped into the system and said, I'm going to do a very hard thing. I'm going to max out, literally max out to the edge of my water, but simultaneously going to eliminate almost all of the risk of losing a crop. And that's the delicate balance that we're talking about. This is just a number for your records. You can make some comparisons. Different types of surface irrigation all the way down to drip. I used to get lots of questions about, okay, LIPA versus drip, which is the winner? My argument would be they're both a winner based on your parameters, but I would say you probably need to exclude just about everything else from that. You just don't want to burn off that extra inefficiency in water because the water is so valuable. Some notes I will make, however, is that when we talk LIPA and I talk LIPA, I'm really not talking traditional LIPA with drag hoses. That's not very practical anymore. With the drag hoses, you have to plant in a circle. The original LIPA system would have furrow dikes for catchments, which means you're tilling, which means you're very disciplined in this field setup. I would say that we capture all of those efficiencies back by our now modern cropping practice, which is heavy residue. I would say I don't think you can be perfectly successful on LIPA if you're still tilling. That's a major, major trade-off. In order for LIPA to work, you need as much residue as you possibly can. One of the reasons, of course, why surface has gone away is we just don't have the water, but the real obvious thing is that the economics of an efficient center pivot system just blow the economics out of the world when it comes to surface here. The fit for drip, I would say, is going to be fields that are odd shaped where you can't fit a full pivot in it. I would even make it a point to consider if you've got a windshield wipe, a pivot for a significant amount, you probably ought to look at drip as well. I personally, as much as I love pivots, I hate windshield wipe pivots for the argument that the beauty of a pivot is it's always in the right place it needs to be, and the ugliness of a windshield wiper is it's always in the wrong place. It's just a trade-off. We'll talk about some strategies with that. That's why I don't like linears too. If any of you got linears, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little harsh on that. I don't think linears fit. I think the thought with linears is we're going to get all the acres in. Here where we're already short on water, burning off those corners is a real blessing because you can concentrate the water in the center. The studies that I've done on the economics of it is concentrating your water under a pivot within a quarter section just really is the sweet spot. That's no mystery. That's why 90+% of what we do in this area is a pivot on a quarter-mile pivot or a half-miler in a square block, burning off the corners and managing it well. It just works. It really, really works. Here's a chart for you that'll be useful. Some of these numbers will be etched into your mind. The idea here is that gallons per minute per acre is your irrigation system capacity. If you wanted to translate that to how many inches a day you're applying to match your ET, if you're in this 90 to 95% efficiency range, which I'd say most are, you can see actually how much you're applying per day that's going to be effective. This number would be useful because then you can take this back to that ET model to say, am I meeting my ET of the day? Quiz for you. If we say this is a satellite image and the green is a healthy plant, healthy in terms of good photosynthesis, proper water content, good temperature, and the red is stressed, and giving you a reference that this dark, dark, dark red is a road, which direction is this pivot traveling? Are we traveling clockwise or counterclockwise? Clockwise. Okay, so what's going to make you say clockwise?
It's it's too many days, not enough water. It's about, 15%.
So you think it's taking a little slow, so it's got like 15% of what we stress crop because it's just not getting to it in time. Yeah. This feels like forensic agronomy. Great theory, my friend. Great theory. Exactly opposite. This pivot is traveling this way. And that's this pivot right out here. Stan managing that. What are we seeing?
Southwest corner.
Southwest quarter's fair. Yeah.
Oh, man.
But that,
Could be bad, you stopped right there during pre-water, and didn't water that little spot, be over-fertilized in that spot, not fertilized, pump went out, there's all sorts of things to make a pie.
but it's matching where the pivot's at exactly.
Yes.
So you're telling me that we might have over fertilized this or over planted this, but not right here, not right in front of the pivot?
Oh, with the sprinkler. Yes, you can.
Let's go to Occam's razor here. Okay, the simplest answer is the answer on this. Despite having short capacity, this is I believe 4 gallons per minute per acre. despite that, we were still able to slightly over irrigate. Where this for about 1 day behind the pivot was showing slight stresses. So it got to where it had too much water. Instead of being very active, that plant set back on its heels till the soil could reach its proper equilibrium with enough air and then back off to the races again. Okay? That's the impact that I want to get you to understand is you can apply too much water. Too much water will look like not enough water in certain situations. This crop, if I remember right, and it's been long enough that I don't remember, I think this old crop yielded in the 260 bushel per acre range. It was a great crop. It did just fine. But what we realized watching this was a bit of an epiphany to us. This was on a 7-day or 8-day loop. I can't remember. I think it's an 8-day loop. And we were, every time it was going through for about a 3-week window, every day it was going through, it was leaving about 1 day's worth of stress on the table. Okay, so more importantly, that forensic, what's curative? What strategies could we have applied to this irrigation system to mitigate this during this window? And I think this was early July. So, you know, it was going to be off to the races. At some point later in the season, we couldn't do that because the machine got too big. You know, the corn got too big. But if we had been really watching this and we really wanted to optimize to eliminate this 1 day's worth of stress,
You just spread it up.
what could we have done?
Spread it up a little.
Yeah. We could have sped it up. Let's say there's probably an equal strategy since we just had a road here. We probably could have even parked it for 1 day. Yep. I'm always nervous a little bit on the speeding up though, although that would be a great answer here, because sometimes the speeding up gives you more opportunity for evaporation because you're still putting the same amount of water out there. And I would hate to give up efficiency for evaporation just to prevent things like runoff or this little setback. Anyway, I think this is just really interesting. Okay, so let's look at this. Was probably my most exciting thing to understand what we're trying to do here. How we can impact this with planting dates. Okay, so this is that same ET model we were looking at before, and we trimmed out a whole bunch of those corn lines so we can get to one that's the 15th of April, the 15th of May, and then a 5th of June planting date, and look at how these models shape up. What are some things that you see when you get to this late planting date on corn? So we compare these two. These would be a short season variety, another short season variety with about 20 days difference in planting. What do we notice from the late planting date corn versus the little bit earlier planting date corn? What's happening? It's using less water, okay? And it's using less water, especially at the peak. So now your capacity is going to cover that deficit a little bit better, but you've shifted this whole model this way. So going back to those wind and temperature graphs, what are we avoiding by pushing this deeper into the year?
The high winds of the spring.
The high wind of the spring, but more than that.
Hailstorm.
Say it again.
Hailstorm. In the spring.
A hailstorm could come anytime in this and wipe out your whole program. Yeah, great point. It might even tip your pivot over too, which would be real awful. So the high wind, but there's two other phenomena that are happening that we can avoid by moving this planting date back.
That high temperature, like June.
So the high temperature, the high wind, okay?
You're not using as much water, I mean,
Yeah.
because you plant, just difference in your plant size.
So your plant's smaller too.
Yep.
Okay, so let's go back to that calendar and look at that summer solstice. We can look at just those horrible 2 weeks at the end of June. You know what happens those horrible 2 weeks at the end of June with this early plant day?
Tasseling and all that.
All the really important stuff. Like the really important energy intensive, water intensive stuff, by backing the planting date out, not only the physical portion of it, but the physiological portion of it allows for the corn to be a lot happier. So if you guys would go back, say 20 years ago, planting corn, how many 20 years ago were planting this 15th of April pretty regular? Yeah? Where do you plant now? Where's your nominal planting date now?
middle of May, somewhere in there. kind of. We
Huge
talked about
deal.
Start a date. April 19th is what we were used to. That's what we started on.
Yep. And some of you probably have even gotten to where you plant cotton before corn, which would have been the exact opposite for a long time. This phenomenon is a legitimate deal. I think one of the changes that was heartfelt to me when I came back to the region was this was something that I preached at one point and got told I was a dummy, and then it's like, oh, you mean we've all changed our planting dates? This is great. But the benefit is, it's easy to see the benefit, but there's a background why that benefit is there. And we'll talk about that a little more as well, but the planting dates are a major, major, major deal. And here it is with the grain corn physiology. Corn matures based on heat, okay? But it grows based on time. So if you can start fast to maximize photosynthesis and finish slow to maximize grain fill, you're optimizing this corn plant. And I'll tell you where this hit me. I don't know if Dr. Amoson's ever heard this story. We had a guy come in from Iowa to one of the master marketer meetings. And I was a stowaway in this master marketer meeting in the now defunct Amarillo building, which is sad it's going away because all the beautiful things that happened there. I snuck in the back of the room as an engineer who knows nothing about economics, nothing about marketing. I couldn't market a single thing. I was like, I'm really intrigued why 100 people are growing up to a master marketer meeting. Master irrigator, I can get behind. That's my world. Like, yeah, this means something. This guy from Iowa came in with 100 years record of what weather looked like in Iowa. And he highlighted, these were our most productive years, our biggest yields. These were our lowest production years, our lowest yields. He said, here's a correlation. On these hot years, where the corn gets off to a race, with a colder fall, we get our maximum yields. And a major light bulb went off for me. And I said, oh crap, I need to go develop this understanding for this simple reason. We have enough heat units in the Texas Panhandle to artificially, every year with reliability, create this phenomenon where we can move that planting date back so we're not in 52-degree soil when we're planting, but we can plant in something that's approaching the mid-60s, okay? And we could finish, instead of being the first one across the scales in the middle of August, you can fill grain all the way through August, all the way through September, okay? So you're capturing the benefit of a reliable start and a reliable finish, and we did that simply by changing the planting dates. The ancillary was we were able to get all of that with a dramatic reduction in applied water. That's a big deal. That's a game changer. Thank goodness for Iowa records. I'm going to go right past this one. This is alfalfa. Who's growing alfalfa in here? You are? Okay, we're not going to go past this. Alfalfa is an interesting crop because each time you cut it, you're taking that machine back to zero. That reprieve is the godsend for being able to manage alfalfa here. Because when alfalfa is growing, it's not a C4 crop. It relies on a lot of water in order to produce that biomass. Now it's high protein biomass, very high feed value, good palatability, lots of reasons why alfalfa is the best forage. But in terms of converting unit water to actual biomass, it's not even close to corn because it's a C3. But we can manage it here because we've got these deficits. So if we're to look at this, this would be something like 5 GPM per acre, 6 GPM per acre, 7 GPM per acre. There was always this mindset that I need to have big capacity for alfalfa. The argument is really you don't, because you can use those same strategies of a little bit of a deficit and you can get by with a lot less capacity and still grow really high quality alfalfa. Do you use center pivots to irrigate your alfalfa? Yeah. You guys ever grown any alfalfa on drip? Almost everything that I manage that's alfalfa-wise is on drip. It works really, really well. Don't be afraid of alfalfa on drip if it's a good fit for you. guess this is my point here is we usually have these mindsets that we needed more water. The actual water that you need for alfalfa in this region, you can do it very reliably on 4 GPM per acre. And probably if you weren't pushing for max yield, just wanted something to put up some hay bales for your own animals, you can certainly get by with less than that. Okay, cotton, kind of a similar thing. We've looked at this a little bit. Here's what I wanted to highlight for you, is your timing is critical, and if you've got a limited resource of the volume of water, you want to be able to partition this water where it's the most useful. It's been my experience that the cotton needs for water, late July through August is where you're going to get the most bang for the buck of water. That's why that corn and cotton rotation kind of works nicely, is because you can partition some of that water over the corn, which needs it earlier. Then as the corn is coming down a little bit where you're trying to dry it down, you can pull some of that same water out and apply it to your cotton, and you get the best of both worlds where you're sharing water. Some things to point out though is this early water is still just critical for vigor in cotton. Getting a cotton stand off and running is absolutely mandatory. And then never forgetting that water at the end of the year, despite how sexy it might look to put 1 more inch on, because it looks like it's going to be, this is finally going to be my warm fall. I'm finally going to get the bang for the buck on this 1 inch of water. It almost never pays off in the North Plains. We just run out of heat. Okay. Sometimes it can be damaging too. It can cause a transition for even a day or two out of finishing that reproduction. If it steps back into vegetation for a day, you're going to do some damage to your yield there. Wheat follows its own rules. Ironically, you get by very little water on wheat because the wind is lower, the heat is much lower. 3 GPM per acre, basically carry over from either your corn or cotton or sorghum system. There's going to be plenty of capacity for wheat. And again, you can do it on 2 if you just needed a bit of a you know what's the joke that I want to grow wheat for the stubble, like because of the benefit it gives the rest of your system if the market's bad. It's still a beautiful ground cover with lots of straws that allow the rest of the accumulated rainfall and irrigation to be much, much more effective. Just some notes for your binder. We won't spend any time on those. This will be our last slide before we take our break. This is another one that for me was an epiphany that I think can potentially change some of your major irrigation strategies, because it's combining just about everything that we've talked about to this common denominator, which is the dollar. You can make a lot of things happen if you can boil them down to equivalent units. We have a hard time with equivalent units too, because we want to say unit this, unit this, unit this. This is the strategy of breaking down our irrigation to the dollar. So let me give you a little bit of orientation of what we're looking at. On the bottom, and this is a grain corn crop. On the bottom, this is total seasonal water. Total being the combination of irrigation, soil storage, and precipitation. And I would warn you, if anybody talks about these in this area isolated, they got a trick up their sleeve. Maybe they're marketing to you. Maybe they're trying to take some credit for a product. You can't decouple irrigation, soil storage, and precipitation here. You just can't. You have to think of them all 3 as the total water because they all contribute. On this side is the bushels per acre. Okay, that's, this indices is going to be this blue line here. So it's a production function. Okay, it's yield per unit water, so each additional unit water giving you some corresponding yield, okay? And this production function was an average across the entire region. It's a little bit stylized, but again, I want you to see it for the principle, not for this is my exact farm. So this model tops out at just under 225 bushels. This axis is your profit. Net residual returns per acre, and it's represented by this green line. Okay, so it's the same x-axis, the same inches. What I want you to envision is what happens if we take a corn production function, We combine it with an operating budget, an honest operating budget, not one that's going to favor what you want to see out of it. If we combine those two, we can see some interesting things here. And those things are that the maximum physiological yield is expected to occur at about 34 inches of total water. Okay, that's still holding true. That's just corn. Our yields have driven up. The water is about the same though. But here's the most important part to consider, is that your maximum economic return is expected to occur at 29 inches of total water. Your best profit. Which indicator do we typically use in our operation? What's the coffee shop indicator? Yield. It's always yield. Okay? If you can manage for maximum profit, you do two things simultaneously. You optimize for money, so now you're more solvent economically, which as a business, that's what you're trying to do anyway. But you also take care of this delta of differential water. So if you're on a regulatory regime like we are here in the North Plains, where you've got 18 inches of water, that 5 inches of water makes a big difference. That 5 inches of water could be used on your crop next to you. It could be banked maybe for next year because you get a little bit of run up on that. One of the real things that I want to point out is that if you have and this is what's deceptive, and I say this is deceptive. Again, this is a bit of a stylized. Here's what I want you to understand. If you are happy with this return in this particular year of $250 per acre, which is really amazing right now, in previous years that was normal. If you are happy with this $250 per acre return, that's beautiful. But I would not say capture that on this side of the curve. I would say capture that $250 per acre on this side of the curve. Okay? That's the take home. Okay, so there's an example, 500 gallons per minute. Center pivot sprays at 90% efficiency over 120 acres. 500 gallons per minute times 0.9 times 0.052 divided by 120 acres means that with that capacity you can apply just under 0.2 of an inch a day. Okay. This is going to be really critical when you're looking into your crop rotation at the start of the year to say, do I have enough water? The one caution that I will give you, because I have seen this probably now hundreds of times in my career, you cannot double count your water. If you have 2 sprinklers and you have one well that gives you 500 gallons per minute, you don't have 500 gallons per minute and 500 gallons per minute. You have one well worth of 500 gallons per minute. Okay, that's just, mark that through your head. Your capacity comes from your wells, not your nozzle package. Okay, your nozzle package has to accommodate what your capacity is.
Where do you get your efficiency at? Off the boat curve?
No, so this would be your application efficiency. Okay, this is based on your final applicator, so whether it was a pivot or drip or surface. The bowl curve is a whole other thing we'll talk about potentially in a little bit, but this efficiency is not related to your pumping efficiency, it's your application efficiency. Yep. And there was a chart, I can go back to it real quick. I think we had it somewhere. Oh, come on now, let's pull it back.
Thank you.
Right here. There's your chart of your efficiencies. Yeah, so that's in your book. You can reference it if you want. This is probably the pace you want me to be talking at anyway, isn't it? Yeah, that's the pace that Mary Beth was talking at. Too fast. Okay. Yeah. Why no love for end guns? Who's got an end gun? Raise your hand.
Worked on one of them.
Okay. We'll provide lunch for whoever can guess what county and state this is in.
Nebraska.
Nebraska.
Arizona.
Excellent. Not Arizona, very logical choice. Yeah.
I'm gonna say about the county roads, Oklahoma.
Yeah, good guess, yeah.
Maybe Texas?
Also a great
We
guess.
just need a little guy out there turn that down, so it just, doesn't water the road.
You just water the road, yeah. Well, this is usually the most beautiful thing about an in gun. This one doesn't have it, but usually like along this side, there's a high voltage power line spraying into it.
It's gotta be Texas.
Yeah.
Gotta be Texas County, because there ain't a lot of high voltage lines running around there.
No, this is Roberts County, Idaho, where they still have an abundance of water, although they're talking about a major adjudication of the East Snake River, because they say we just can't get enough of this water, and the aquifer is tied to the surface water. And I was like, would you like me to solve your problem? Like, I could solve your problem today. Like, done.
Lots of water goes right there.
Yeah, all the water that you need. I mean, this is what we saw in guns. Is in guns get you marginally more acres in, but when you're not acres limited and you're water limited, you need to just burn off those acres. If for some reason you have a great opportunity, you think those percentage of acres that are in the corners are really useful to you, subsurface drip is your answer. The economics of it are far and away better in those corners, and it's a perfect fit for it if you do have extra capacity. Here's the ugly thing about in-guns that I really don't like about in-guns on wells is once this in-gun comes on, it's now completely obliterated your entire nozzle package. Your nozzle package is no longer effective because you can't add more water to it to shove through and make this balance and this balance off of most wells. And if you did have that much water, that means you're leaving that much capacity in the hole. Like the balance is way off on using these in-guns. It's a bit of a reference to add to our soil metrics. You can pay attention to the idea being that there are days after surface wetting that water is still available, and this makes sense. Clay doesn't infiltrate quite as quickly, so it's going to have water out to about 10 days available for surface evaporation when you apply it on the surface. This really is one of those arguments that is strongly in favor of subsurface drip, because if you can apply water below the soil surface, all of this is basically irrelevant. But the mechanics matter. We want to capture our water in the soil to protect it for as long as we can. Okay. So this would be a spray. Obviously you see it's canopied over. What are some things that you see in this picture when you look at it, just off the cuff? What's in this picture? Based on what we're talking about, what's in this picture?
It's a Lisa system.
You got pretty good water, you got 2 pads.
It's great water. Great water. This is within North Plains District though, but this is some of some great water.
Have a little bit of yellowing of the leaves.
Okay? Yeah, down on the low margins a little bit.
There's a lot of good canopy, so your evaporation losses will be less than if you didn't have a lot of canopy.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I was fishing for. Okay, the canopy serves as a great barrier to evaporation. So once you are canopied, if you can get your drops down below the canopy where all of the water is always going in the shade, you can forgive a whole lot of other upper operating sins that sometimes are difficult to manage if you don't have good canopy. Some other things that make corn beautiful with a pivot is that if you look at how the corn plant is shaped with the whorls and it twists and it's got all these capture points all the way up, one of the ways that corn takes water to its roots is by capturing it somewhere out here and funneling it.
Yeah, down to the base of the plant.
Yep, it concentrates it. It's great. I think this picture just illustrates that. That's one of the reasons that I enjoyed it.
It needs to be in bubble.
So let's ask, what's the difference between, say, this and bubble in this scenario?
You've got more evaporation with that because you've got more surface area that the water's on.
Yep.
Even if canopy or not, you're still losing water.
You're losing some. Yep. I'm a big fan of bubble whenever there is open soil. The delta between the two isn't nearly as bad at this point. So I know people have changed their strategy where they start with longer applications on bubble mode, and then at some point think it's useful to narrow that application. So instead of being 7 or 8 days, once you've got full canopy, drop it down to 4 days in the spring. It's not ideal. One thing I will say is you can go that way from a long duration to a short duration. You absolutely cannot go the other way. You can't go from short to long. You'll burn up a crop.
If you're short going like that, you will be.
Absolutely. Yep. There's another argument for having some residue. It matters. It makes a world of difference. Your infiltration is critical. The roots are in the soil. You want to make sure that you've got macropores, which the organic matter and the residue just allows for. It's just a much better way to do this. You see the side by side, it's just night and day difference in terms of what type of water that soil can take. The argument being this, if you want to use bubblers are really going to rely on those macropores because with that weight of the droplet falling, it can seal up the soil to where you're not infiltrating very well. So we've got some competing challenges there. We want to get it into the soil to store it, but the big heavy drop of the bubble sometimes can compact that top without the residue there to disperse it. Sometimes it's hard to get the benefits of that. I think what you're seeing is that these are all a system. There's no one answer. It really is a comprehensive way to manage to get the best out of it. Application rate versus the runoff and percolation. Typically the strategy would be that your maximum irrigation application should get to the point of surface runoff and no more. Okay, just think about that. What you can hold on the surface without it running to the next area over is the maximum of what you can apply. Once you start applying more in that little pocket towards bleeding over to the other one, your efficiency is going downhill fast and you're not getting the uniformity that you need in the field. Some things to keep in mind, and this is where that mobile drip really starts to make sense, is that this is kind of a time area, a water volume index. If you need to apply a lot of water, one of the best ways to do it is to increase that width of application. So for reference with the mobile drip, it's got this drag that goes way, way, way back. What that's doing is increasing that surface area that you're applying the water. So the water that's dropped here in this spot, that spot's going to continue to get small trickles of water all the way until that mobile drip passes. Things that would contribute to that on a normal sprinkler that might make sense is if you hang off the front and then your next one you're hanging off the back, kind of alternating, you're creating that larger window so you can get a little bit larger surface water application if you want to put a deeper irrigation on it. Generally speaking, the soils in this area, it's been my experience that 1.8 to give or take 2.1 inches per pass is kind of that sweet spot of what you can hold. You go much more than that, you're going to start running off. You can go as less than that as you want. There's arguments why you wouldn't want to apply too much less than that related to evaporation. Strategically, although it's maybe not intuitive, you do almost exclusively want to slow down your sprinkler in drought situations. If you speed it up, you're contributing more surface area more consistently for the atmosphere to evaporate. Your goal is I want to get this water in and as deep as quickly as possible, and the way that you're going to do that is by slowing down the sprinkler.
I've got a question on that.
Yep.
So as you look at a lot of the new technology and AI tools that are being used, they are 100% suggesting the opposite. At least that's what it appears to be. Talking with producers, I feel like there's a split. Some guys are saying we're definitely seeing improvements that way, but it seems like the talking people, you know, you and other people that get and talk in front of all of us say, don't speed up, right? Slow down. And I'm not here to say you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, can you provide maybe some explanation why these computers are driving us the other way?
Yeah. What I've seen with algorithms related to irrigation is sometimes they're optimizing for things that aren't exactly relevant in this part of the world. In this part of the world, all of that unprotected water is subject for evaporation in a hurry due to vapor pressure deficit. And whenever you are providing a fraction of that water to the atmosphere is taking its piece. So in theory, the more often you're providing that water to the atmosphere, the more total volume of water you're contributing to the atmosphere rather than benefits the plant. Now in a different area where wind isn't intense and where maybe the heat isn't quite as intense, and the ultimate factor of having plenty of water, that would not be the case. You would want to provide as frequently as possible. And there's places that irrigate, you know this as a drip guy, maybe 18 times a day. They're just trickle, 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 just the extreme other side of frequency. And there's a whole spectrum in there. Like if one property's got sand, you wouldn't want to apply a 2-inch application because you just can't get it, you can't keep it. But the real issue is we're fighting vapor pressure deficit here, and the more water that you expose to the atmosphere, the more the atmosphere takes as a percentage of the ET model. I don't have a lot of familiarity with the AI models to know what they're using to drive that, so I can't speak to that. Here would be the math on that. The idea being that more applications lead to more evaporative loss. We've got a scenario at 550 GPM on 120 acres, so basically a quarter of an inch per day. And we're going to make this assumption that you get 0.2 evaporation loss per application. A 3-day lap is going to lead to 1.84 inches over 10 days, or a 5-day lap is going to lead to 2.1 inches of effective water over 10 days. It's over a 90-day season. Those lap rates could contribute positively or negatively to something like 2.25 inches of water, which might be substantial in your crop. Is everybody familiar what, I said the phrase vapor pressure deficit. Anybody not familiar with that phrase? Okay, I probably should have worded it a little differently. I got a little esoteric in that. Vapor pressure deficit is a measure of the atmosphere's dryness. So the atmosphere wants to get to some equilibrium. And you know if you walk outside during a lot of the growing season, like you feel it from your own body, like, man, I'm parched. My lips are dry, my hands are dry, like it just feels like this convection oven. Where if you compare that, you walk into a full canopy crop and there's a little bit of moisture and you feel a complete difference there. The atmosphere is, and this is part of the tool of photosynthesis really, in order to get water from the roots up through the plant, that vapor pressure deficit is what really contributes. It says, I'm extra dry, it's wet down here, I'm going to create this vacuum which is going to help the plant efficiently move the water through. But if you don't have a plant to move the water through, the atmosphere is still taking the water. And really we want that to happen, but we want it to happen with all the water going through the plant to provide that whole litany of other benefits that the plant gets. So we're just trying to protect from the atmosphere getting its share freely. It's like you can have your share, but you got to do the work for it. And the work is get the minerals into the plant, help it control the plant's regulation, allow this plant to have enough water to be able to capture sunlight, all of those photosynthetic things. I'm going to highlight this, we'll get on to some mechanics. Critical management point, that's the point where your plant's needs exceed your capacity. The principle here that I want you just to understand is every year in deficit, that's going to happen. You have to plan somewhere far enough back to start your irrigation system so you can build up the store to carry you through the period where you don't have enough. That critical management point is that one day of the year. And there's models that highlight that. That's an important thing to get your head around. If you apply too much over here, it can be wasteful. You apply not enough, you're going to have some crop damage later on in the season. This is where pre-water comes in. Used to be the preaching, oh, we got to pre-water like crazy. Then the preaching came around, 0 pre-water, absolutely not. Then we changed the planting dates to get deeper into this warm season. Guess what came back into the discussion? a little bit of pre-water, but we want to be smart about it. Again, with what we're trying to accomplish, this is where it gets into the mechanism. The interface between the system and the plant is going to be our nozzles on our sprinklers. Everybody, I hope, can see the ringing that's happening here. Okay, that interface, that little plastic tool, that nozzle, is just absolutely critical. This is an example of plugged or worn out nozzles. Depending on where it is on the machine, it can give you this impact. And you get that striping. It's really easy to see from aerial imagery. This one, as well as rare occasions where you can see it from the high spot in the field. You're like, oh, we got something mechanical going on here. So let's understand what a nozzle is. The nozzle is ultimately an orifice, okay, or a strategically designed hole. This is your primary flow regulator. We talked about our pressure regulators as the regulators. Those are secondary. The nozzle is your primary regulator. It's your most important one. Typically on a machine, it's going to start, we're in near the center, it's smaller hole. Out towards the end, it's going to be a bigger orifice, bigger hole, because you have to cover more ground in the amount of time as the sprinkler's going around. So what happens hypothetically if you have this nozzle and it gets worn out where it's extruded in maybe near the first tower? What's the impact on your system? A lot of flooding, right? But where's that water supposed to be at?
At the end.
Somewhere else, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's the impact. That what would happen if we had nozzles plugged? There's going to be stress underneath it. There's going to be dry, and you're not going to get the water out there. Because these nozzles are an orifice, that is one of the most studied engineering devices. The flows are really, really predictable with a good, clean nozzle package. But your nozzle package needs to be designed to match your capacity. This isn't one where you can say, well, I really want 500 gallons per minute. I've actually got 450 gallons per minute. Why don't you give that nozzle package for 500? Okay, you need to match that. I know we jest. How many of you have went in to get something renozzled based on the water that you think you have? It's important to match it. You got to match it.
The regulators make a lot of difference.
They do. Yep, we'll get to that next. In terms of order, just want to emphasize that this is really that primary regulation tool, your nozzle. So how frequently should you change nozzles? With clean water? Maybe never. That's the one end of the spectrum. But if you've got bad water and you're extrude honing, or you've got some calcium, or you've got some algae, you've got some things out there that are wearing the nozzles out, or if you have a change in flow conditions by something in the 25 to 50 gallons per minute, you better be quick to change your nozzles. And this is where the regulator comes in. The tighter your water is, the more control you have to have over the system. So the regulator is just absolutely critical when you start to make these changes. What do you think was going on with the nozzles on this sprinkler?
Clear it out.
He couldn't get any water at the end because he'd done the exact opposite. This is sand, and so the sand just was sandblasting that plastic, and so every nozzle on the machine was like a number 20. Couldn't get any water to the end because the sand was just beating these nozzles to death. This is a funny story. Funny, not so funny. This is, I'm forgetting the name of the highway. What's the name of the highway that runs from Amarillo towards Dallas? Like when you go through Denton? And,
287.
yeah. This is just on the south side of the highway. And he had to have a transfer truck of gravel brought each season to backfill into his well. So he had a fill port where he was replacing his gravel pack on his casing because he was moving so much material out of there. Right under the highway. I kind of looked at that highway. I thought, I'm not going to look at this highway the same ever again. Talk about some subsidence. Back to the nozzles, though. There's no way you can keep nozzles working with this water. you better be using filters and hydrocyclones at this point. And he did, he installed some of that. Same, sometimes you'll get plugging. So back to the plugging. Usually plugging comes from the organic materials. Like this is a feedlot that's using a sprinkler to get rid of the water. And so what happens with the organic materials is they bridge a little bit. And you bridge that nozzle and you just back up everything. You can plug it like crazy. So, really a risk. Don't be afraid of a filter if you need it. Protecting your nozzles is pretty important. Another thing that makes a big difference on these nozzles is the altered drop heights. Keep in mind that every 2.3 feet of elevation, so every 2.3 feet up, is a 1 psi difference. Those nozzles are calibrated based on the delivered pressure to them. So if you have a nozzle that's designed to be behind a regulator at 6 or 10 psi, and all of a sudden it's getting less psi than that, is it putting out the right amount of water? It can't. So one of the biggest things that we would see is make sure that your drop heights are the proper drop height and that they're uniform. Why do you think a guy would have raised these up here?
You got a motor to go over.
Absolutely he's got a motor to go over. Like in the abstract, you're like, oh, what's he doing? And then you realize, wait a second, this sure looks like it's on this path of this well out here. So it's important to recognize that there are some compromises. Once we saw the difference, because this clearly was one of those areas that had a stripe around it, he built the structure around there so that those drops could hit it and walk around it the best that they can. But there's tons of trade-offs. Here's just an example. Not a perfect world, but ways that I probably would otherwise suggest this is if I knew I had less pressure at these drops, what would I do with that nozzle?
Open it up.
I'd get a bigger nozzle there. So I know I've got 2 less PSI on it compared to where the package is. Well, maybe I go 2 or 3 sizes bigger there.
Go to bubble.
Just compensate it. Go to bubble would work too. Yeah. That's your answer for everything. I like this. Other thing to consider, your pivot drains, necessary evil. But small leaks accumulative across will definitely ruin a nozzle package. But I wouldn't recommend closing up your drains either. The freeze damage could be quite severe. So system pressures that vary with slope, this is where the regulators come in, because the regulator's design is to make sure that the pressure that nozzle sees is consistent and reliable. That way you can always get the flow out. If you're on a perfectly flat field and you have a good nozzle package, there is absolutely no need for a regulator. How many of you are on a perfectly flat field? If you just do the math in the Texas North Plains, from west to east, every pivot in the Texas North Plains needs regulators. Just the way it is. Because the difference between one side to the other is so severe that you have to compensate for that high side and low side elevation change.
I thought it was because of all the hills.
That's worse too, yeah. So going back to that Idaho picture, like just across the border in Washington, we've got some pivots making like a 70-foot climb.
Yeah.
And then coming back down the other side, you're thinking, couldn't they find some flatland somewhere? I mean, I would.
Well, that's even like at Fall Lake.
Yes.
Rollins, we sold them a bunch of sprinklers, and I meant the truss rods would almost hit the hill. I mean, in between some towers.
Yep.
I mean, that's how close they drag the sand to get through there.
Mentioning that property, that root dig that we did was out at that property. And yeah, you definitely see them climbing and dropping that way. Speaking about plugging and wearing out, regulators are a wear item. They are necessary when you have the slope that we have. You're not going to get past them. They're not cheap as a wear item. Some telltale signs though. If it's plugged, you typically can get away with cleaning it, but you better figure out why it's plugging and fix that. A regulator is designed to leak and weep out this seam when it's worn out. So if you ever see a regulator that's leaking water out there, it's not doing you a good job of regulating. It's broke, it's worn out. Here's the deal with the regulators. If it's not working and your system is not up to pressure to set this regulator, it ends up being a bit of a flow through. And this becomes a real challenge when you're trying to start a sprinkler on low capacity, because it's hard sometimes to set a couple hundred regulators at once. So you better know your system, and oftentimes you need to say, I may need to turn 2 wells into the sprinkler to get it going, get my whole system pressure up, and then I know my system's set, then I can take that pressure and maybe start another sprinkler. But oftentimes, if you want to start a 300 gallon per minute sprinkler with a 300 gallon per minute nozzle package that's got regulators, you might have a very difficult time setting those regulators. You're probably going to need to be strategic and make sure that that pivot is pointing uphill when you want to start it. That way you can get some forced pressure.
Makes a big difference on the setting and regulators if you don't.
Yep. Well, I mean, it's kind of the same thing too with those nozzles. If you've got too big of a nozzle at the front, you're not going to get water out to the end. If you don't set your regulators, you're never going to get water out to the end of the sprinkler. Well, where are the most of your anchors at? You need to favor on a sprinkler getting your water out to the end. That's your real priority in managing it. And so that's where this all pieces together. Harold.
Nick, I got a question. How about, when would you use 6 and or 10 pound regulators?
Good question. You may have a preference on that. The real difference in those is that the 6 uses less energy. That was the major push that Leon drove for to get 6s in this area, was it's just 4 psi of energy that you don't need to quote unquote burn off. If you design the nozzle package for 6, you can get by with 6 psi regulator. If you design the nozzle package for 10, a 6 psi regulator's not going to work at all for you.
Well, now that our GPMs have dropped off, so it's just like we're having to change. And I didn't realize that, but I think that's what Senator suggested, go from 6 to 10s.
Yeah. You're able to put more energy into the water easier than you are to put more water in the water.
Yeah.
And so it's going to cost a little bit more, but that's probably I mean,
When we had more water packages, you'd have some 6.
in the first couple of
And then you
stands.
go out to a 10.
Yeah.
Later on when you had ample water.
Yeah. I think the major points that you can't mix and match those. A 6 nozzle package is going to be quite a bit different than a 10 nozzle package. So this thought here, where's most of the crop? Obviously you've got a wheel. The outside span is going to be your biggest represented crop, almost to the point. I think the math is the outside span is something like 20 to 25% of your acreage, depending on how big your spans are. That's substantial. You gotta favor that. The method for measuring pressure on pivots is also really critical. When you look at the nozzle package and you want to evaluate, because of the contribution of elevation and pressure, your measurement at the top of the sprinkler is going to be a lot different than the measure at your drops. You need to make sure that you're talking the same language on your nozzle package. When you get the nozzle package, there's usually both of those measurements on it. If you are trying to get the measurement at the sprinkler like this, you can see the sprinkler here, and then this drop with a gauge and a flow through to measure that pressure on it. That's really the only accurate way. Dynamic pressure with the water flowing through it is going to be a little different than the static pressure. If you're wanting to measure that pressure, you need to measure it at the location with water flowing through it. But just to make a point, you need to know your pressures at the top and bottom of the end of the system. That's going to be your best diagnostic tool. The top of the system at the front and on the last drop is also going to be really helpful too. That way you can go and reference your nozzle package and see, am I in compliance? Is this working? Now what happens if your flow meter says you've got enough water and your nozzle package says you need to have 10 psi and you walk out to your sprinkler and say, I've only got 8 psi, what's going on? What would that indicate to you is what's happening?
Flow meter.
Yeah, the flow meter's out. Yeah, it's always the fault, right? The flow meter's wrong. Ironically, and to your point, I actually trust a good nozzle package probably better than most flow meters.
I mean, the pressure makes all of them. Because your flow meter can say you've got 700 or whatever.
Yep.
Like you said, you got 2, 3, 4 pounds of difference at the end, and you don't have the water.
Yeah, but I think there's two factors there. One, certainly culprit number one is the flow meter wrong. Like that's, but culprit number two is you could have some extruded nozzles. If you got good faith in your flow meters, like I've gotten ones that I've known how to calibrate, I'm comfortable with that. That becomes an invaluable tool. You just need to have it. But if I'm walking up to a micrometer meter that's doing this, I'm going to find a different way to measure that water.
And also, we was talking about the nozzles wearing out. Flow meter, you got all of that going by it.
Yeah.
The nozzle, that certain nozzle doesn't have as much volume going through it as that
Yep.
flow meter.
Yep.
So replacing it.
Some other items that can really wreak havoc as you're trying to get these things sorted out, especially in low capacity. Keep in mind that every ounce of water that you pump from these wells is going to have some percentage of air in it. Give or take 3% air from all of our wells. That air will accumulate at the high spot on your system. This is just physics and hydrogeology. It's what happens. What happens, however, when you get air accumulating in a pipeline? It creates a little bit of a balloon and that water flow goes down. Okay, so what happens now if you've got a sprinkler system that's got orifices and holes that it relies on water going out, but you've created this big balloon in the pipeline? Are you able to effectively get your water to where you want it? No, it can inhibit it. So some things to keep in mind, especially on low capacity, big pipelines. Over time you will accumulate air. I highly recommend a continuous acting air vent of some sort. And you should install it at the top of the sprinkler. If you were to look at this picture, some things that happen, just keeping this in mind is if you are entraining air in the water, especially if you're surging, now you're putting a huge amount of air in the water, that air is going to end up at the high spot of the pipeline where your goosenecks come off the top. So in order for this water to come down, it's got to come up. Well, if this is full of air and you've got water rushing by here and you've got an open orifice at the end, you've created a special circumstance called a venturi. And you can actually suck water into the sprinkler from there.
Because you got a vacuum.
You've created a vacuum. Yep. So if you go out to a sprinkler and you notice all my first couple of drops are not spraying, oftentimes obviously you could use more water, but typically what's happened is you've accumulated a bunch of air in that pipeline. Continuous acting air vent on the top of the sprinkler is a real helpful way at that last point to evacuate that air and keep your nozzle package working.
There's a funny deal.
It is, and I want to talk about something that can blow some pipelines apart too, and that's the other thing. Air is interesting because you can compress it. You can't compress water, but you can compress this air. It stores a lot of energy until the point that the stuff around it can't contain that energy. Now you're making a backhoe repair rather than a nozzle repair. Some things that are real simple to make sure that your water goes as far as possible is daytime and nighttime variations. Obviously we're looking at an internal combustion engine here. Denser, cooler air makes a lot more power. Typically you're going to pump more at night. Also the benefit of applying water at night, we don't have all the stresses of the wind or the sun beating on it. More of that water can be used for the plant, so there's some advantages to the places that get water at night. But if you're making a symmetrical loop with the sprinkler, and it's hitting the same places at night and the same places during the day, over the course of the season, you're going to see a dramatic difference between those nighttime water versus those daytime watered plants. And so some things to keep in mind when you start to stagger your irrigation is go ahead and give these a half-day offset so that you're applying your waters uniformly across the field as easy. These are some just inexpensive or perfectly free tools that allow you to get the best bang for your buck out of the water. That's something to keep in mind. Less of a variation with an electric motor, it still exists. Irrigate during a storm if you have to. Unless you want an insurance claim and a failed crop. Light sprinklers are harder to blow over than a heavy sprinkler. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but This is, again, one of those counterintuitive things. I know the thought is, from a lot of folks that would be passerby, it's raining, go turn off my irrigation system. Most of the time during the year here, you need all of that rainwater and all of that irrigation you can get, so keep it going, even to the point that if power goes out, your effort probably ought to be trying to get power up as soon as possible. The benefit here too is you may be short on what your irrigation system can do. If you're getting a little bit of a rainfall, you get to secure a lot more of that water, even your applied water into the soil, without the evaporative losses. It's a chance to double up your bank. Not going to talk much about pivot tires and gearboxes except to say keep them well maintained. You want good lugs. Go ahead and do the maintenance, it's worth it. Who's got a cure for this?
Cinder blocks.
Cinder blocks.
Railroad ties.
Cinder blocks break up if anything goes across, any plow goes across. You just out there and lay them out there and let that thing walk across it.
I'm envisioning your like Roman, like lined streets for the pivot tracks.
Oh yeah, I'm serious.
Awesome. Here's some anecdotes. I personally have never seen a sprinkler stuck on dry ground. Okay. Here's the windshield relay water. Again, this is a compromise. I don't love windshield wipers because the sprinkler is almost exclusively on the exact opposite side of the field of where it needs to be. But sometimes this is still the best option because you've got a house or a barn or a structure or something where you have to go back around. And so when you make these compromises, you want to do the best with what you can in these circumstances. We do a lot of that in agriculture. My argument here is let's don't get too complicated in the management. Water volume is still water volume, and your goal is to try to reach towards uniformity. So you want to match the application to the maximum infiltration in the corners. So if we said before it's 2 inches in one day, you want to think about what can I do, say the last 30 degrees in, to go in and back out and get at that 2-inch application, and then just use that pace the rest of the way, the 2 inches, so 1 inch in, 1 inch out, and go back around. You can get really strategic about speeding up in the middle if you wanted to, or slowing down in the middle. My biggest argument here is you never gain ground by deadheading back. The only places I've seen deadheads work is if you've got a slice of, say, cotton in the part of the field and you want to go from corn to sorghum or something like that. Go ahead and sprint through the cotton if you don't want to put water on it. But in a windshield wipe, you're going to burn way too much time just sprinting back. And you don't want to turn your well off, so you're going to deadhead, but you're effectively deadheading with all of the water just going to the atmosphere on that half-day trip back.
Probably gonna get stuck too.
Yes, sir.
You're gonna get stuck.
Yeah, it's going to look like that.
Yeah, it's gonna look like that.
You gotta speed it up to get there and back.
Be able to speed up and finish out on the ends and then speed up back to a point and then slow down.
Yep.
That's the best way, if you have,
If you got the controller to do that,
Yeah.
there's a lot of fine-tuning you can do in there to really make it work for you. Yep.
because you can adjust, I mean, figure out on your land where to have it speed up, reverse back to, and that.
Yep.
Used to, and that's, we'd always, like you said, speed up going back to a point, not
Not all the way.
not like 10 minutes or whatever, but a half inch or something. That way you get back over there, say in 6 days, or if you're making a pass in 6 days. Get here, be back here in 1 day, which makes your 6th day and starting back again. I mean,
Yeah.
'cause you'll double flood here and you'll dry out on the other side.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what you're trying to avoid. Yeah, great point. Yeah, the take home and exactly what you just said, water volume equals water volume, and your goal is to make sure that each part of that field gets the same amount of water. That's the goal. Just a couple of pictures here. Everything that we've been talking about with efficient irrigation is going to rely at this point in time on some sort of stubble and residue management. I just don't think it's wise to do it without it. Just, it's successful, it works. You have to alter a couple things, get used to being a trashy farmer, but it is what gives you the most bang for your buck with allowing these high efficiency irrigation systems to work. Allows you to capture your water, infiltrate your water, protect it from evaporation, increase your organic matter so you get the benefits of water transmissivity in the soil. It is the right thing for us to be doing.
I got a question on that. So in this area, there's a huge demand for silage.
Yep.
So what's your experience tell you on flying on covers or interseeding covers or doing it after the silage is gone or whatnot to try to, have some residue?
Yep. So that's a very, very salient question. I think it goes to the fact that everybody wants some residue, but if you have to irrigate, say, that cover to get that residue, you're really gonna have to start to talk about what's my cost-benefit ratio here, what's my trade-off. My preference would be to leave some residue even with silage. One of the strategies with dairies in California right now that's really interesting is taking what they're calling headlage, where they will leave stalks in the field that are this high.
Yeah.
And the first time you see it, like, what is he doing? Then you ask the producer who says, well, I'm getting the best, because they're going for feed value at that point. So I'm getting the highest quality that I can without having to carry this, in their case, all this extra fiber or cellulose in. So the easy one is let's leave some residue with the silage. I know that's not common. I know with the corn silage the thought is, nope, I want it all. And that's a
Same way
major
with
trade-off.
swath it and baling.
That's how you.
Yep.
You swath it, you leave, like end of the season or whatever, leave it a little taller where you have a little winter protection.
In my opinion, what's left behind from a grain crop in terms of the potassium and the phosphate almost exclusively pays for what you would get as a benefit if you're taking that fodder off and marketing it. The silage is much different because the idea is we're going to take all of that in. It does come as a tremendous detriment to the field, in my opinion. I think you work around it if that's the contract that you can get. I think you work around it if that's the only crop that you can market. But my preference certainly would be to leave something behind, and the more you can do better.
And that's like with the corn getting later and later in the year, trying to get a cover crop or
Yep.
or that up is tough. I mean, once you cut in November, or whatever.
Well, even that thought of a late plant corn, and maybe historically you would have been able to follow corn with a wheat crop.
Right.
You're too late in the year to do that.
Right, we
And-
used to, and we did that in the 80s, 90s, had the plane go in there when the corn was up. It wasn't a uniform, but it was a good ground cover for cattle, for grazing, for a little extra money back on that,
Yep. You know what's interesting is running cattle afterwards, even if you don't have the cover, just cattle on the stubble, doesn't seem to do the physical damage to the field that removing it mechanically would do.
Yeah.
The cattle can even be argued to make some benefit in that system.
Yeah.
The question is how many people are
But-
wanting to have a
Yeah.
cattle operation as part of the farming operation too. Okay, so now we effectively got through 2 of 3 parts. Most of part 3 is going to be self-study, so enjoy your homework. We'll go through a couple things with pumping plants. Efficiency. This is the core of what we're doing with our irrigation equipment, and it's a measure of how well an input is converted to a desired output. So some examples of that we've talked about today. Input dollars to profit, water to crop yield, so think of water use efficiency. With the pumping plants, it's energy to pumped water. Okay, and this goes back to you talking about the pump curves. This is an important part of it. All of these components of this pumping plant have an innate, I'm going to call it an innate inefficiency. They're all burning off some of that energy in order to do the work that you want it to do.
My question is, why can you find a high efficient bow, like 86%, and then you find an 82% bow that takes less horsepower for the same gallons and lead?
So what will typically drive that is where that flow rate occurs. I don't know that I've seen a comparable pump that's going to require less horsepower unless it's using either less pressure or less water.
Every day I see it.
Okay? Yeah, I'd love to learn that. We can go to some pump curves. Let's talk about that after, okay?
Okay.
This is part of the pumping plant program that we did, where you isolate the energy coming in, run it through the motor, whether it be a natural gas or diesel. This one's a Chrysler 413, run through a drive shaft, a gear head, down the well to a bowl. The idea being here is that there are some systematic changes that you can make along the way that really impact the bottom line. In this case, and I'll go through these case studies and just highlight the bottom line, okay? The impact on this is we're able to make some changes where it was a 50% increase in water and simultaneously $1.17 per acre inch decrease in cost, just by identifying and then making the changes to the pumping plant. This particular one, he needed more water because his crop needed a little more water. He had a big Cummins that he was overdriving. He said, I don't think I'm getting the horsepower out of this motor because I'm not able to have enough power to get it to the RPM that I need. So we went from a 10 to 11 gearhead to a 1-to-1 gearhead. It cost him more to do it, but he's able to get a 50 gallon per minute increase in water. He said that water is going to pay off in my crop. I'm happy with that. Next one, go past that. Case 3, Caterpillar 3406. This one had a measured load of 128 horsepower and 20% efficiency. He really should be somewhere in the 23 to 25% efficiency. In this particular application, he just had way too much motor. He's spinning way too much iron for the work he was doing, was paying for it in efficiency. Now, is this motor still going? Yeah, probably it is. He's never loaded it up. He's probably gonna sit there for the rest of his life and hum away. Rare occasions, this happens, you test a well, and you get an overall efficiency of, say, 59%, which is higher than the industry standard in this pumping plant situation, which should be something like 56%. So in this case, what's the advice to this guy? Just keep doing what you're doing. Good maintenance and keep operating. Anybody running diesel still? Thank goodness.
Close.
Say it again.
It's getting close.
Oh, I would highly advise you not to run diesel. You and I might have some interesting conversations afterwards. This particular place was a dual fuel model running natural gas through diesel. We found that if we could tune his natural gas, he had bought, this was a new farm that this producer had bought, and he bought it because the previous producer went bankrupt. And when you start to look at what made him go bankrupt, the seasonal savings that we were able to do by modifying this pumping strategy was $23,000 per year per pivot. Almost free natural gas at this place, and full freight diesel fuel. The real answer here would get rid of the diesel engines completely and just run natural gas. This is an interesting one. We had a single 496. In the shed, there was a dual 427 setup. They had a major problem here because they had expensive water, couldn't get enough of it, and they were doing something really interesting. They were running their pivot off of this generator. What do you think was happening to their drive motors on their far spans?
Burning them up.
Regularly. Okay? So we're able to put more horsepower here in a more efficient package, get the RPM from 1690 fully loaded, it couldn't carry the load, up to the pump's rated speed, so basically 1770. Gallons per minute went from 700 to 850. This is the kicker though. He got his volts up where his volts were now able to convey enough volts out to that far.
You gotta watch getting over the volts too.
Well,
No, that's fine there, but I mean,
You bet.
get up here at 490, 500.
I like
Eight
500
up too.
volts.
No, I read it up too.
At the same time, dropped his cost per acre inch. These are all just really to say that these components make a big bottom line difference, and be paying attention to them. There's none of them that are in isolation, and the way that they work together really makes your system work. I would say also that if you have a natural gas power plant that's not operating as efficiently as possible, you need to take those steps to make sure it's in compliance. That means regular oil changes, regular plugs, make sure that if you've got even on these old Molines, if you have the spark box in good shape, you can get great efficiency out of them, but don't run them into deep, low efficient operation, because what happens is every last other efficiency or inefficiency on the system gets multiplied by how bad this engine is. So your engine needs to be in great shape. We'll come back in a little bit and talk about some gen sets, but we'll leave this for now and go on with the program.